Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. George Russell has given a rather gloomy outlook on the potential of the 2023 season, believing Red Bull will win every single race this season. That's the bet he's putting on the way this season is going to play out. And with Verstappen with a clear gap to Perez, is this shaping up for one of the worst seasons in recent Formula 1 memory? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Now look, since 2017, the driver that's won the first race of the year has gone on to finish second in the Drivers' Championship. The only way that happens this year is if Perez somehow beats Verstappen, in my opinion. I just can't see it going any other way, unless there is like some hidden gremlins in the Red Bull car and some reliability problems that are going to emerge, or if Red Bull say, you know what, we're going to leave the RB19 as is, focus fully on next year, and then things start to go wrong and other teams catch up. It's only Bahrain, it's only one race, but the delta is astonishing between the Red Bull and the rest of the field. Their car is fastest by a mile, and there's still way more pace in the tank. They were managing tyres, they were managing engine modes. Like, that car might be as dominant as some of the early Mercedes were from 2014 and 2016. Some people are even comparing it to the W11 in certain respects. We'll see some of the comparisons here in a second. Hamilton was even given his thoughts on what are the chances you can get a podium in Jeddah, and he's like, no, we're absolutely miles off. So last season, Hamilton was quite confident from relatively early on that they would get a victory at some point. They eventually did. It was Russell, not Hamilton, but they got the 1-2 in Brazil. This season, it seems like even the idea of that is so far away from so many different teams. Ferrari is still confident, as they like to be. They reckon that in Jeddah, the fast corners are particularly good for their car. So if Ferrari can get close in Jeddah, then maybe we have something to think about this season. And at some point, Red Bull surely will make some sort of setup mistake, or something will go wrong. They might have some reliability issue. It's a 23 race season, but the idea that they're going to win every single race is not particularly far-fetched with the way it currently looks. So George Russell gave his thoughts on this immediately after the race yesterday. I don't know that this is a very pessimistic look from Russell and Mercedes, but it's arguably a realistic one. As I mentioned earlier today, the cost cap as it is in effect, Mercedes and others can't focus on this season's car if they want to change their concept for next year. They've got to put the developmental resources into next year's car. They can bring changes to this year's car to see if what they're going to try and do next year is going to work, but fundamentally, they got this year's concept wrong, and it's about sacrificing this season, in Russell's opinion, to ensure they can do better next year, rather than trying to catch a Red Bull, which they're straight up not going to catch. Red Bull, I mean, he says the following: Red Bull have this championship sewn up. I don't think anyone's going to be fighting for it this year, and I expect them to win every single race this season is my bet. With the performance they have got, I don't see anybody challenging. They've got it easy at the moment. They can do what they like, and I feel the same way about Red Bull in a way. Like, it doesn't matter what they do for strategy. I know they were on the radio to Verstappen saying, hey, calm down, don't go too fast, preserve the tyres, preserve the power unit, all this stuff. But, you know, at some point they're just going to let him off the leash, I'm sure. And also Verstappen individually, like, he can do what they could have 3 stopped, they could have probably 4 stopped and still won the race. Like, the delta is that mega that even if they didn't have the best strategy team in the world, which they do, even if they didn't have the best driver in the world, which they do, then they would still be winning every race probably, or at least the vast majority of them. Now, look, it's a long season, things change, there will be, you know, I'm sure there will be something else that happens this season other than a Red Bull whitewash, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. Now, Russell does say that on Saturday it might not always be pole position because Ferrari are competitive. When it comes to race pace, they're in a very strong position, and I mean, look, even as he goes on to say, we're here to optimize every result, but if you give me a choice between fighting and having a chance to win races whenever that is, versus slow progress and never having a chance, I'll take the chance at a victory, as in, we've got to sacrifice part of the season, Mercedes, to give themselves a chance of a car in the future, even if, like, the half of this season is over. So I think he's kind of, well, basically they're giving up on the season already, and he reckons they're going to win the championship, no problem at all, and will win every race this season. Now, the issue is, I think, for Formula 1 fans about this is, like, there's been domination in the past, but it's a very interesting period of time if Red Bull do dominate this season and win, let's say, 20 of the 23 races they win this season. That is a level of domination that we've had before. I mean, fairness, last year they won 17 of 22, so it wasn't really too far away, Red Bull, but this year is looking like it's going to be even worse because Mercedes and Ferrari have messed up, and Red Bull's closest challenger is Aston Martin, that was 7th last year, and realistically are not going to be able to challenge Red Bull for the championship this year in either, you know, drivers or constructors, you would well imagine. But this is the first potentially completely dominant season with very few interesting storylines at the front of the grids since we've really, well, since it's been this social media Drive to Survive sport. Since Drive to Survive has been around, we haven't had a season that looks like it's going to be shaping up to how this season is. For example, Max Verstappen has won 15 of his last 20 races, dating back to Imola last year. year. Lewis Hamilton, throughout the entire turbo hybrid era, never matched that winning percentage. He either didn't quite have the car compared to Ferrari and Red Bull to dominate in that way, or had a competitive teammate in Nico Rosberg, as he did in 2014 to 2016. This level of Verstappen dominance is unprecedented, and this year their car is even better than it was last year. That's the scary thing. So just to look here, this is on an individual level on the most dominant single seasons in Formula 1 history, and a couple of the ones that come to mind, I think, for many F1 fans are actually the Schumacher seasons of 2002 and 2004, where Schumacher was pretty much on the podium at every single race. He was either first or second, like every single race in those seasons, and his teammate was just not there to challenge. Like, obviously, Hamilton 2020 in the Mercedes, the W11, was a dominant season. It was obviously a season cut relatively short, but then you even looked at the seasons like, okay, 2018, 2015, 2014. Hamilton, technically, he had very dominant seasons, but in those years, there was something interesting going on. Like in 2014, 2016, 2015, less so, that was more dominant for Hamilton, but 2014, 2016, there was a real challenge there from Nico Rosberg, and the championship deciders went right down to the wire. And yes, the Mercedes was by far the best car, and you knew that it was going to be a 1-2 every weekend unless they took each other out in Spain as they did in 2016, or there were some other issues that the cars had at the time. You knew it was going to be a 1-2 Mercedes, but at least there was some battle for the championship, right? You didn't really know who was going to come out on top. There was always some drama brewing between Hamilton and Rosberg because they were actually on a similar level. Verstappen is, Perez isn't on the same level as Verstappen. Maybe another driver in Perez's spot could be, and even if Verstappen did have a competitive teammate, I'm not really sure Red Bull would allow it necessarily anyway. I think they've seen enough of the kind of multi-1-2 situations in years past, and they would probably shut any of that down regardless. So it's quite clear what's going to happen, but the issue is, like, I think for Formula 1 fans, is even in some of these dominant Mercedes seasons, where look at this is points per race per team, 1988 McLaren, the Ferraris in 2002, 2004. This doesn't include some of the more, I think Red Bull 2022 would have been on here if this had been made slightly more recently, but for example, I mean, you can get 43 points, right, from a first place and a second place, 25 plus 18, plus I guess a fastest lap points. Your maximum on a weekend is 44. Mercedes averaged 37 in 2015, 36.4 in 2016, and that's pretty much the record of all time. But at least in 2016, there was some, some battle between the drivers, right? Whereas this year, not only is Verstappen going to win the title more than likely, and Red Bull going to win the constructors, but you kind of know what's going to happen on each individual weekends. Like, if Verstappen finishes a race this season, I feel like he's going to win it, right? If there's a DNF or some sort of issue, it seems likely Verstappen, can find a way not to win. But if Verstappen finishes the race, then it's probably a win for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. So that's where it's going to get very interesting, actually, what the fan perception is of this, and also what, if this does indeed work out this season as we expected to, given the pace advantage they have, which is absolutely immense, and up there, honestly, with some of the more dominant Mercedes, at least theoretically, compared to their opposition at the top of the grid. Like, what does Liberty Media think about this? What do Formula 1 themselves think about this? Because in the recent age with Formula 1 making massive progress in fans and viewership, this is, like, even in 2017, 18, 19, like, okay, Mercedes won all those years, Hamilton won the titles, but, Ferrari were close at times. Like, you didn't know going into a weekend whether Ferrari were going to be on pole. They could have a good weekend and get pole, or they could win the race that weekend. Like, it was never guaranteed that Hamilton was going to win, like, every single race, right? Okay, it usually happens, but at least there was some competition for at least half of those seasons with a Ferrari or at times with a Red Bull, even though Mercedes did dominate that era for those 8 constructors they won in a row. Like, most of those years had something interesting in the battle at the sharp end of the field. This year, I know it's shaping up to look like that the battle is for third. And all credit to Red Bull, right? They've done a cracking job. Red Bull have made the best car, they had the best concept, they've doubled down on it, they've got the best driver, they've got the best team, best strategy, all this stuff. They've absolutely nailed it, and they deserve the championship even already before they've even won it. But it's not exactly a good look for Formula 1 fans who would like to see a competitive season. If you guys think the Red Bull were a long way ahead, for example, they were 38 seconds ahead of Alonso on the race this past weekend. They were 51 seconds ahead of Hamilton in the lead Mercedes, and they still had at least another second per lap in them. That's just on 10 laps to go. Engine power was reduced. That was costing them a second a lap. In addition to the additional, they could have worn their tyres harder, pushed harder. Verstappen was asked on the radio, just preserve tyres, right? I mean, he was actually asked here on one of the laps, I'm happy to go slower, he says, but, and his engineer says there's no race at the moment. Max just target a lap 1:37.0, and that's what he did. He reckons here that he could have gone about 0.8 of a second faster, and that's purely pace. That's not even considering the engine mode. modes. So, like, this car might be in race pace a second quicker than the Aston Martins, pushing a second and a half, 2 seconds quicker than the Ferrari and the Mercedes. Like, it's an unbelievable gap they've established, and they've done unbelievably well to achieve that. But, you know, it doesn't bode well for the competition of the season. So, look, is Russell right? I know that people like to bag on Russell for saying things, and, you know, he's maybe not the most likable character on the grid, some would say, but nonetheless, is he right? Based on our early indications, he probably is. I just wonder what this will mean for F1 and for the ownership, given that we haven't had a season shaping up like this in quite some time. Verstappen did say in an interview after the race that he's expecting his rivals to be closer, and to be honest, I imagine that he's kind of hoping they will be, because it must get kind of boring for Verstappen out there at the front, thinking about what he's going to have for dinner that night, while he drives around seconds clear of the rest, and if he needs to unlock some pace, if he has a bad pit stop, then he's free to do so. It's an ominous sign for the season, there is no doubt. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.